I just want to thank everybody for joining us, our panelists, and also Monica, who's helping us out here with some of the technical details. This webinar is also being recorded. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The recording will be made available after, and it is also being captioned professionally. Thank you to ACS Captions who are helping to caption this webinar. That transcript will also be made available after. Mobility International USA is an organization. We work to advance the rights and leadership of people with disabilities globally through international exchange and international development. And today we're going to be talking about exchange. This webinar is put on by our National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, which is a grant from the U.S. Department of State, a project to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange between the United States and other countries. And the project is supported in its implementation by our organization, Mobility International USA. And with that, without any further ado, I think we'll go ahead and start. So my name is Justin Harford, and I am the project coordinator of the Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. I got into this when I studied abroad many years ago in Chile as a blind person, and that experience was so meaningful for me. I wanted to create opportunities for other people to have the same experiences. And I think we're going to open up now with our first question to our panelists. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how your professional or academic interests have led you into your experiences with Japan.
My name is Melissa. Should I go? My name is Melissa MacDonald, and I became interested in Japan when I was about 13 years old, mainly through pop culture. And I really wanted to study Japanese, but there were no classes in my hometown. So I went on foreign exchange in high school, and I had such a good experience. I came back as a college foreign exchange student, and I didn't want to leave, so I transferred in to my current university as a third-year transfer student. So I have been here for the past year and a half, just trying to finish my bachelor's degree, and I hope to work and teach English when I graduate.
Hi, I'm Alistair Howard. I'm the Assistant Vice President for International Affairs at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm responsible for study abroad. So we send students to Japan in fairly large numbers. We have a campus in Japan, and I spent 3 years there as Chief Academic Officer, leading curriculum and student advising in a variety of other academic functions. And so got to know a lot of students who came to Japan for reasons like Melissa. And I was also responsible for our disability resources service. And so that's my professional interest in Japan. I think Justin's muted.
Oh yeah, it looks like he's...
Let's see. Hello.
You're back.
Great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, could somebody tell me what slide we're on? I'm not getting the voice feedback I was expecting.
We're on the title slide right now. Studying or working in Japan.
Okay, now moving forward.
Yep.
Great.
Actually, no, it didn't move forward.
Oh.
I'm going to try.
Let's see here.
Now we're on slide 8. That's the title slide.
Slide.
Yep.
Oh, perfect.
There you go.
Okay. Sorry about that complication, folks. So most of the questions that we get about ADHD and going to Japan with ADHD have to do with medications. So what was that experience like for you getting the medications that you needed?
Missy, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I can go first. So when I came for high school foreign exchange, it was actually pre-diagnosis. So I didn't know that I had ADHD at the time, and I really just thought I was bad at learning foreign languages or something. But the school was trying to help me, private tutoring, etc. So if you don't want to share with them, then people will still help you. But when I came back for college foreign exchange, I talked to the advisor in charge of exchange students. And basically, I was given help within a day. She called a local clinic because you need a referral. And it was within 20 minutes walking of my host family. So I was going there with my host mother the first day. And it was an English speaking clinic. So I got very quick referral, and within a week I had my medication. I got Concerta there. So that was extremely easy for me to do. I brought a note from my doctor from America that said, this is what she has, this is what I've been prescribing her. And they didn't require me to translate that or anything. It was an English speaking clinic, so I just gave them that letter. And then when I transferred to my current university, I talked to the people in charge of the students, and I'm part of the general student body now, so there's less staff available, but I was still helped within 2 or 3 days. I was given a referral to a Japanese-speaking clinic. I could have gone to an English-speaking clinic, but it was much farther away. So if you're comfortable using Japanese, that would be easier. And I got my medication there. I gave them my referral from my last clinic and the doctor's note as well. And I was given medication within the same day that I went in. So it's been very easy for me, and I was getting Concerta.
So I can speak, both personally and professionally, and maybe I'll start with the personal. So before I went to Japan, I had an adult ADHD diagnosis and was taking a medicine called Vyvanse. But I was aware that most of the medications that are used in the United States are not available in Japan. In fact, only 2, and now 3, but only 2 of the conventionally prescribed medicines are available in Japan. So I talked to my doctor prior to going about how we would manage that. On arrival in Japan, and I actually tried to manage without medication for the first couple of months. After a couple of months, I decided that wasn't a great idea. So I found an English-speaking psychiatrist. I'm not able to speak Japanese. And I explained the diagnosis that I'd had in the United States and gave him my medical records. And then he prescribed the one stimulant which is available in Japan, which is Concerta, which is an extended release methylphenidate. And after that, I was able to get it each month in a regular supply by going to the doctor and to the pharmacist next door. I was paying out of pocket and then claiming the money back on my insurance. Of course, that would vary. I was not in the Japanese National Health System. Perhaps, Melissa, you were or are in the Japanese National Health System.
Yes, I always had 70% of the costs covered by health insurance.
Exactly. The Japanese system is very efficient, very well run, at least in policy terms and in my experience. And it does pay for about 70% of medications. And children below college-age children actually get the rest paid as well, generally speaking. So the medications are available. You do have to jump through some hoops to get the medications there as is appropriate. Stimulant medications are not prescribed as much in Japan as they are in the United States. In my research, I found only about 65% of students, young people, that is, who are receiving who are receiving medication for ADHD are taking stimulants. The others are taking Strattera, which is the second medicine conventionally available. And that's prescribed often in the United States as well. It's a non-stimulant ADHD treatment.
Thank you. It looks like, so on our next slide, we have, tell us about your experience with the Japanese healthcare system. It sounds like you guys have already gone into quite a bit of detail on that. Is there just anything that you'd like to add? And it occurs to me also there's another question I might interject in here based on what you've been sharing so far.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit, when I was in the United States, I was taking Adderall, and I knew it would not be allowed here. So I attempted to switch over to Concerta before I came, but my American health insurance actually didn't cover Concerta, and it was very expensive. So I decided to just wait until I came here. And in Japan, the health insurance covered it right away, and I had no issues. So for me, the Japanese healthcare system has been much easier. Communication-wise and insurance-wise, I haven't had any issues. And in the United States, I had good insurance, so I'm not sure why that was such an issue. But in my experience, it has been comparable or better.
So Yeah, so Adderall is not allowed in Japan. Amphetamine salts are not allowed in Japan, and this goes
Right.
back to the Japanese post-war experience, in which about 500,000 people were taking methamphetamines on a daily basis to go to work. And so they eradicated stimulant use. And then over the years, amphetamines were still banned and remain banned today. Methylphenidate was prescribed from the 60s on for depression, and only very recently for ADHD. Um, and it's only allowed in the extended release form, which
Right.
is Concerta, which Melissa mentioned and which I was also taking when I was there. So Adderall, which is amphetamine, dextroamphetamine, is not allowed, and the instant release methylphenidate, which is called Ritalin, is not allowed. And this is all about preventing abuse and stimulant dependency.
Excellent. And the kind of the other question that occurs to me after listening to this, and you guys have kind of been getting around this a little bit, is it seems like, I know at least when we advise advisors, and then what I suppose is when advisors are advising people who are planning on going abroad to study or volunteer or whatever the case may be, is how reasonable is it to, for example, ask somebody that they change from one medication that they've been using for a long time to another, and or B, even that they perhaps, like what you actually both, it sounds like, had to do, go without it for a period of time. Maybe just a comment about what your experience has been on that.
Yeah, so when we talk to students about going abroad, and every country is different, but particularly since we're talking about Japan, we brief them on these differences. And we really, from the very first moment we're talking to them about study abroad, we tell them that they need to be thinking not just about their academic curriculum and how their courses will fit when they're abroad to their broader goals, but also about their health needs and their wellness needs. And most study abroad offices do an excellent job of advising students one-on-one and talking to them one-on-one. You know, we're not lawyers, we're not doctors, but we read the literature in the study abroad community and so on, and we're reasonably well briefed, I think. My staff are much better briefed than me, in fact, on this. But we're talking to students and we're saying, look, here's what you need to do when you're applying for our program, and I assume this is true of any good exchange program, study abroad program, or university program. We're asking them, once they're accepted, what are your health needs? What are your health concerns? We're asking them to meet with their doctors and generate actually a health plan which talks about specifically about medication, about continuity of care, and then about what symptoms they might expect in a new and uncertain environment and what they're going to do about those symptoms. So that in particular, it seems to me, is really helpful. Think about how you deal with stress when you're abroad. You know, people with ADHD often become frustrated and angry when they can't, complete a task, particularly if they're in a new academic environment. If they're learning Japanese in particular, it can be really tough. So we talk to them about what strategies they can adopt and tactics they can employ when they encounter these stresses, which we know that they will. And so we tell them it's hard work. We talk to them about how to get the medication, and there's some steps I can go into later. And we talk to them about anticipating the issues that they're likely to encounter. And we also talk to them about the many successful experiences people have. It is possible to do it.
Yeah, I was given some good advice before I came that it would be a good idea to take a lighter class load my first semester here, just so I could get used to being in a new environment and potentially having a period of time without my medication. Luckily for me, I got my medication right away, so I had it before the school year started. But I think if you're worried about not doing well or changing medications, it'd be a good idea to take it a little bit easier and just see how it goes so you don't get so overwhelmed.
That's right. It's important to plan ahead for sure.
Yeah, all great advice. So, I mean, it sounds kind of like, some of these things, like you maybe having to go a short time without, or, having to change medications. They're not showstoppers. They can be things people have to get ready for that. People have to get ready for experiencing maybe too the frustration of being in a different environment and changing medications. And like you were saying also, Alistair, with people having trouble getting things done. But that's just kind of part of the experience. And as long as people People just need to get ready for it, and it's just and it's possible. Now, another concern has to do with how people might be treated in Japan. So how has it been for you when you share that you have ADHD? How do people react, and what was it like? What's it been like for you meeting people?
Every time I've mentioned it, people just haven't known what it is, with the exception of one person I met who actually had ADHD. They were untreated, but they had never met anyone, maybe because people don't talk about it as much here. But for the most part, people have been curious and interested because they just haven't heard of it. And mental health is just something that people talk about less. If you talk about it like it's, if you talk about your symptoms and not just the name ADHD, they would get the idea. But I haven't had any trouble, and I think people have all been very friendly and open to hearing about it. So I wouldn't worry at all if you're nervous about telling people or think they might think ill of you. I don't think that would be the case.
Yeah, so the incidence rates in Japan, according to the more recent research, are a little bit lower than in the United States, but significantly higher. That is, incidence rates of diagnosed ADHD are higher than they are in some of the European countries. So it is something that's being diagnosed in schools in particular. Adult ADHD is not really, or has only recently become recognized. Mm-hmm. But it is being talked about in schools, so younger kids and younger adults, presumably, will have had special access to special education or will have known about special education. And the initial treatment options in Japan are generally environmental, so reducing clutter in the space, helping the students be more organized, perhaps mm-hmm. looking at diet, and then therapy, cognitive behavioral or other kinds of sort of talking therapy, if you like. And then prescriptions are the sort of third tier. So they may be a little bit less quick to, prescribe in Japan, but it's certainly recognized. And the rates are not that different. One thing I noticed in Japan is that people are, I hate to generalize and stereotype, but there's a lot of evidence that Japan is more of a community-based culture or a collectivist culture. And matters of individual identity are not stressed in public discourse in the way that they are in the United States. And this is also true in many other parts of the world, frankly. So some people coming from the United States may place disability or other characteristics that they have or happen to have as a central part of their identity. And that's often not, I don't want to say it's greeted with hostility, but it may be understood. Whereas, as Melissa said, having the symptoms is understood. It's just not that it's a central part of our life, and some of us feel that way anyway. So I don't think it's been a hostile environment at all.
And I think that kind of like actually your comment about maybe being a communal environment, maybe this will actually help us answer this next question, which is, could you tell what's it been like getting any reasonable accommodations in school? I know you're studying there, Missy, and Alistair, I know that you've worked there. So what's that been like?
When I was in high school and my first college semester at a foreign exchange school, I stayed with host families, and it was optional to do that. The question is about accommodations like where I lived, correct?
Like supports, like, for example, extra time on tests, or like, I don't know what that was like for you in the first few weeks you were maybe adjusting to a new medication regimen, that kind of thing.
Right. So I was given, basically, if you wind up staying with a host family, they agree to do a lot for you. Like if you have dietary restrictions or if you have the need to go to the doctor. So for example, my second host mother was able to come with me and help me. And had I been in a dormitory, there will be school staff that can help translate for you or assist you in finding where you need to go. And in both cases, I had a sort of academic advisor that was able to give me referrals or just general life advice. And there's always a school nurse and a school counselor. So I felt like going through the school system, and at each school I was at, I had more than enough help and assistance. So I didn't really struggle for figuring anything out because there was a big support network.
And, I can really only speak about Temple University's Japan campus, which operates under American educational practices and American law, in fact, on disabilities. So, we worked very hard to get the accommodations that were necessary and for which students were eligible. Often I would so I was working with faculty, and as at our American campus as well, there are a range of views and opinions at any given time. And so there are professors who may be less happy about giving extensions, for example, on timed tests but generally speaking, what we did was explain the logic behind the accommodations and the fact that it would help achieve the ultimate objective, which is learning, and that we're not here to punish students or see if they can do timed tests. We're here to see if they can learn the material that's being tested. So the vast majority of professors were absolutely fine with that once it was explained to them. And indeed, accommodations were made all the time.
And if you're not able to get a private classroom, if studying in a loud environment is difficult, I have been able to ask professors if I can take a test with earplugs in. They will want to check to make sure you're not cheating, but if you're at a school that doesn't have accommodations for like a quiet space or a separate classroom, there are ways around it. So it would be my advice just to ask and see what people can do.
That is a great idea. I found that noise canceling headphones have been a real help for me in my work by reducing kind of aural clutter around
Right.
And I never really, funnily enough, I never connected it to ADHD, but of course that's what it is.
Distractions.
It's distraction, right?
Yeah.
Such a great comment. Actually, I think one of our registrants, when they signed up, one of their questions was about assistive technology. Like, are there any other, apart from noise canceling headphones for taking tests and focusing, are there any other assistive technology devices, either low tech or high tech, that helped you guys?
I pretty much always use earplugs. I also had a fidget cube at one point because it's very discreet, like about this big. And there's little buttons and stuff on it, because if you click your pen, it can make a lot of noise. So if you could get something small like that to play with, I think it could be useful.
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I smoked because I was ADHD, but I do not recommend that.
Don't recommend that.
No, I'm certainly not recommending that. No, I think, being organized, taking the time at the beginning of a task to, be very organized and reduce the clutter, visual and if you like, even intellectual. So simplifying documents with clear hierarchies of, outlining in clear hierarchical ways allows me at least to move through a written document much more easily than, some perhaps more graphically interesting texts. So, and I don't think that's necessarily unique to people who are diagnosed with ADHD. It may just be a good way of helping yourself think, but it certainly helps for me.
I also think,
yes.
Sorry. Calendar blocking. I know a lot of people make to-do lists, but not just for ADHD, but for anyone. In Japan, a lot of people carry like these sort of planners. So if you have things you need to do, so you don't double book or you don't have a arbitrary to-do list that you never get around to, I'd recommend calendar blocking, because if you know when you're going to do something, you set aside the time for it, and it's a lot more easy to stay organized. So I'd recommend getting a small calendar.
That is such great advice. Yeah.
Excellent. Could you, we actually have plenty of time too, I can see. I wonder, I apologize to everybody in advance. This webinar, I realize we are very much biased against Yak and Xiaomis right now. I don't think anybody here has direct experience applying for a Yak and Xiaomi. I can say that Mobility International USA, if you go to our website, we do have a resource on going to Japan with ADHD, and there we do offer a little bit of commentary on the process.
Yeah.
And also, you can link. We have an article that we link to. But could you guys comment? I mean,
sure.
Alistair, I know you've worked with a lot of students. Could you comment about that?
Yeah, so when we do the post-acceptance medical information gathering for students going to Japan, we talk to them about the need to apply for what's essentially an import certificate called the Yakin Shomei, and it's not just a formality in that you must have one if you bring more than a month's supply of any personal medication. So you have to have it, but as long as you're applying for, let's say, a 3-month supply of an acceptable medicine, and you provide the necessary proof that it's been prescribed, and doctor's note and so on, it is given generally. I mean, I've seen cases where a form has been returned by the government, the Japanese government, saying, you can't bring this, please resubmit without this medicine listed. But they're not trying to stop you from coming in. They're trying to establish that you're bringing medicine for your own personal use, and that it's being used for the appropriate condition in line with your doctor's prescription. Now, again, we're talking about an import certificate for medicines that are allowed in Japan. So, as I said earlier, for ADHD, that would be Concerta or methylphenidate extended release. Or for Strattera or atomoxetine, and guanfacine is a new medicine. I don't know much about that. But so to have more than a month's supply, you need your certificate. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to apply for a certificate to bring in a banned substance. So Adderall is not going to be allowed even with the certificate. It's just important to remember that.
Yes, I think that's good to mention. I think sometimes, a lot of other countries, I could see how it could be easy to get used to, like the European system, where if a medication is obtained legally elsewhere and you have a doctor's note, you pretty much can take it in. Well, this is definitely not that way.
That's right. And then I suggest that you take, you obviously want to, when you bring the medication into the country, when you take the medication into the country, you need to bring it in the original packaging, and you need to have all the necessary documentation, including the import certificate, the Yakin Shomei. But then if you're taking medicine on the street with you, perhaps to school, if you're taking your pill or pills later in the day, I think it's a really good idea to carry a copy, perhaps on your telephone, of the certificate and of the prescription that you have. And it needs to be in Japanese. So, non-Japanese people are frequently stopped by police and asked, particularly if they're riding a bicycle without lights, as I did fairly frequently, and asked for their their status. Invariably polite and not at all threatening. It's not a scary experience, but it is possible. Particularly young men, I think, might be searched under those conditions, and occasionally we have students who have been searched and even detained. Again, it's very, very rare, but it happens. And I think having a copy of this prescription in Japanese, so you can say to the officer there, here, this is a medicine which I take legally and I have permission, then that's just good practice, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, and could you comment too on, and also just want to share too that Monica has shared the link to our tip sheet, which actually was compiled with Missy and Alistair's help. So thank you for that. And could you comment also too, like this can, probably as you're getting ready, if you're an advisor, you're getting ready to kind of figure out to advise a student who's who's going abroad. And sometimes too, I think these rules actually going to Japan, it can also apply too if you're talking about a student who's taking medication for pain management, or maybe even medication for mental health concerns too. So you're probably going to interact a lot with the authorities. And what's that like? Corresponding with, and what would you say are kind of the main resources of the Japanese government or the Japanese authority that people should connect with when trying to clarify questions about medications and how to fill out forms?
Lists tend to be updated, so I think if you look at individual airports, what they will and will not allow to be imported, and on the ministry government page, there tends to be updated lists of medications. And you really can never be too careful in checking, because they're like there were certain types of inhalers, certain types of cold medicines that were not allowed here. And it'd be really easy to just assume you could bring it in. So I think if you check on government webpage and you call individual airports, that would be a good idea prior to getting here.
Yeah, so there are two Japanese government websites which I've used. One is the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare, and then the other is the Narcotics Control Board. So the Ministry of Health essentially is where you get your yakan shomei. The Narcotics Control Board, and they link to each other, but that explains what's allowed and what's not allowed. Pain medications you have to be really careful with. In Europe, for example, you can easily get codeine mixed with acetaminophen or ibuprofen. That's not allowed in Japan at all, and it's not allowed here in the United States without prescription. So these things do vary by country, but as Missy said, the lists are updated regularly. The government in Japan, as everywhere, is constantly reviewing pharmaceutical applications for approval. For example, Vyvanse was expected to be approved in 2018. The company had applied. In the end, it was not approved. This medicine I mentioned earlier, guanfacine, is now allowed. I think that's only recently, perhaps 2018. So things move quickly, and you just need to check the government website, before leaving. It is in English, and the links are there.
Thank you. And yeah, we link to that website as well, the one that Alistair mentioned on the article, which is in the chat box. And I'm trying to think. So yeah, and I think too, actually, that for me, I think it also gels too with my experience, at least when I was trying to put together these resources. I mean, I have reached out to European governments about their rules on importation, and I found that the Japanese authorities, for as strict as they can seem like from the outside, that they are very responsive and very helpful when you're reaching out with a question or anything.
Yeah, we try to get students to apply, 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, preferably much longer, but it can take up to 3 weeks to get your yakan shomei.
And they can
I may be pronouncing that wrong. You can correct me, but so I mean, you need to do this early. You just need to plan ahead.
Yes, and also just kind of as a note too, I can see. I think I've seen still some instructions where they say the yakan shomei is something that you have to mail. But just to clarify, you can also email that application too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Going back to our discussion about social life, and also I'd just like to invite our audience to, if you have any questions, to submit as well. We're totally open. But just kind of going back to, we talked a little bit about social, what's it like meeting people? What's it like? How do people react when they find out you have ADHD? I mean, I think this is, I think it's let's focus on the positive too. I feel like, it's not just about stigma. So could you guys tell us, like, what are maybe some high points that come to mind for you in your interactions with Japanese culture? What are some really kind of like aha moments, or some really experiences that are positive and that you'll recall? They can be related to ADHD or can be related to whatever, like, I mean, I'm talking to two people here who both have extensive experience with Japan, and you've just kept coming back over and over again. So what's kind of kept you interested in that?
I met a lot of people that really, I grew up in a small town that was not very diverse, so I really had no idea what to expect, like coming here and being a minority. But everyone was very interested in learning about me and my country. And people were very warm and welcoming. And you often hear in Japan, it's kind of, public face and private face, hard to get to know people deeply. But I didn't find that to be the case. Everyone was so nice. And one unique experience I think people don't expect is you get the chance to be in a very global, diverse environment, because there's other foreign people here who are maybe from Europe or Southeast Asia, and you kind of all get to meet each other because you're all not Japanese. So in that way, if you're in any sort of like school or work environment that's more diverse, it's just such a good opportunity to meet people from all over the world. And I think you'd be surprised at how many different types of people you could meet here. And for Japanese people, they've all been very nice and polite and friendly. It really depends on who, like people are all different, but I really have had very few bad experiences, if any. So I wouldn't worry about that. If you're outgoing and friendly, especially if you're from the United States, they might expect you to be very outgoing. So just know that if they're shy, that they might be expecting you to sort of be friendly off the bat. So you might have to try hard to smile and make the first move when talking to people, stuff like that.
And just to kind of to point out an interesting opportunity here too, you're going to Tokyo International University, which is a university that seems to pretty actively court international students, right?
Right.
And you're enrolled there as a full-time degree-seeking student.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what do you
there's
think? Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. There's a degree program in English. So if you're not fluent in Japanese, you can study Japanese on the side while doing your degree in English. And all of my classes are so diverse, like Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Canada, like people are from everywhere. So it's been a great experience.
Excellent. What do you think, Alistair? Any experience?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure any of them were kind of central to, you know, a medical condition that I may have. I guess,
no, absolutely not.
Maybe I wasn't I wasn't
just anything really
oversharing it. That's a classic symptom, right, of ADHD. But yeah, so I try not to overshare. But no, I think the Japanese, Japanese society is famously kind of conformist is the wrong word, but there's a clear sense of group identity and commitment to the group, which I admire tremendously. And I think that the ability to sort of listen and tolerate silence which is something I've always wished I could do more of. That was, I observed that there. Japanese folks it's not a highly verbal culture. And which is not to say people aren't, can't be loud, in the evening or whatever. I mean, but it's not a very verbal culture generally compared to others. And consequently, I found that quite valuable. And we talk to our students about how, observing people around you and seeing how they behave and maybe, following along in that behavior, assuming it's not destructive. But for example, not talking on trains. It's, trains tend to be very quiet in Japan, except for at vacation time when people are going on long distance trains when it becomes a huge party, right? But on the daily commute trains, very quiet. And we observe that. We ask our students to observe that, and then you don't have to be a demonstrative American individual or a demonstrative British individual at that moment. You could just hey, go with the flow. And so I mean that traveling, I suppose, anywhere can produce that kind of reaction, but that has been something I particularly admired about Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. And going on to, you guys have learned a second language and kind of a challenging.
I haven't. I'll be honest with you. No.
Okay, but Missy.
I was defeated by Japanese. Missy did that. Right?
But Missy, you have. And,
conversationally fluent, not great, but.
No, everybody's always a self-critic. I bring it up because one of the, I follow a variety of listservs, including one on disability services. And one of the questions I wish I would just see less of is a student with learning disability reached out to me, asked for an exemption from language classes and because of their disability. So could you, and I totally was not planning on asking you this question. So it's okay if guys, they had a chance to prepare for these other questions, but not this one. But if you could try to do your best to comment to us about what that was like learning Japanese, and maybe some comments too for students who are urging for an exemption from language classes.
Yeah, of course.
Who are confronted by a student wishing to be exempted.
When I was in high school, I was forced to take Spanish for a year. And I really didn't like it, and I thought I can just never learn a foreign language. And when I was a kid, I thought, like 13, I thought it would be cool to learn Japanese. So it's been a really long road for me to get to this point. And I'll say that no matter how many times you quit studying, if you just start studying and stick with it again, it will pay off, because it seems just insurmountable and it's just this big memory game. And I think it's a good excuse to just want to quit because it seems like too much. But it's really about consistency. And I know that can be hard, but like using a calendar. One other tech option I forgot to mention is if you get an electronic flashcard app, it's free. It's called Anki, and it's a spaced repetition system. So you use the least amount of time possible to memorize something, which can be helpful if you need a lot of repetition. If you forget things easily, you could set a reminder so it reminds you on your phone. Honestly, I think it's just taught me a lot of patience because I've been studying a lot longer than some of the people at my same level of Japanese. So I sort of feel like I've been very slow, but I did get here. So I want to say it's not impossible. If you think you can't learn a language, you maybe just need to find a better study strategy, and just not give up.
The first part of your story about having to study Spanish was, we know of an excellent professor of German who I believe teaches at Oberlin College. And if any of our audience want to be put in touch, I'm happy to. She's always really happy to share her experiences teaching, including teaching students with learning disabilities. But one of her comments was that sometimes when students request an exemption, it can kind of it's because of a traumatic experience that they had with an early language where they were forced to do something, they didn't really like the language, and it was traumatic. So it sounds like that was kind of how it was for you, maybe initially. But then you found this one language that I guess, but you were really passionate about Japanese though,
yeah, I was a lot more interested. So
yeah, I would say as well that learning Japanese is extreme, and I'm saying this from having talked to people who have learned it successfully as well as people who failed like me. But it's very, very hard, right? It's very hard work. Keep doing it. Use the strategies that Missy is suggesting. But you also may want to talk about, if you're doing research about venues in which to learn Japanese, think about the different and ask about the different kind of pedagogies that are used at the various institutions you might learn at. Japanese language instruction in some institutions is very traditional. The language may be taught in ways that are appropriate for younger children, for example, Japanese children in particular.
More immersive.
And very focused on the grammar and structure and the perfection of each item. And language studies, second language acquisition, is a field of study in itself. And we used to teach that way here in America and in Europe and so on. Language teaching kind of moves on or has moved on. And so you want to find the right school, I guess, that has the right approach. And second language acquisition for adults is very different from second language acquisition for children. And you should do the research if you're coming to or going to Japan rather, and to learn Japanese. Just ask those sorts of questions. What kind of teaching do you do? Japanese instructors can be very old-fashioned and really just think it's a matter of sitting still and learning the kanji and learning and getting everything perfect before moving on to the next item. Again, it's not a cultural thing. That's how we used to do it in Victorian Britain, for example. And it works for some people, right? But it's worth doing the inquiry.
You just commented too about another question. I mean, this is totally maybe going beyond disability, but could be an interesting thing to consider though, is when you talk about college, Japanese college and US college, how do those two systems compare in terms of how the curriculum's designed, how students are taught, what the expectations are of the students?
It really depends on the college, but I know in Japan, high school tends to be harder than in the United States because they're studying for college entrance exams. So it tends to be very difficult to get into college. And then once they get in, a lot of students sort of take it easy because they know that when they start working, their work life will not have any balance. Depending on the student, if they want to go to grad school, if they're at a very good university, it totally depends. But in my experience, university in the United States was more difficult, and it was more academically rigorous. And in Japan, it has been easier, with the exception of foreign language, because I do think studying Japanese is so difficult. It really overshadows all of my other study. So for me, it's kind of worked out that my English language-based classes have been easier because I can focus more on Japanese. It really depends on the school. And if you're only here for foreign exchange, people tend to do a pretty light class load, more elective based, because they also want to travel and enjoy the country. But if you're a degree seeking student, I could imagine it would be manageable, similar to the US, or maybe easier.
Yeah, I mean, at Temple University's Japan campus, at the risk of promoting it, we teach in the American mode. And I should say it's an American mode that's really been adopted in the last 40 to 50 years in the United States. Japanese universities tend to be much more lecture-based. The expectation is there'll be tests, or a test, an exam at the end, perhaps a midterm, and that the purpose of the class is to pass the test. So there's much less demanded of the student in terms of continuous assessment or learning and demonstrating learning to the professor throughout the semester. And again, that's how we used to do it in the United States and in Britain. So this is not a cultural variable, I think. But consequently, Japanese students at Temple Japan doing their full degree at Temple Japan often say they were not expecting university to be as difficult. I think what Missy said is exactly right. And instructors I know who have taught in Japanese universities say they're surprised that students are expecting to get A's because they got into university.
Mm.
So, there are those differences for sure.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, perfect. Well, I think that we are getting down to the last. Before I forget, I will mention that in addition to our resources, the resources on our website, Missy also has a YouTube channel, and she takes up all of her experiences in Japan. So if you want to learn more about that, where can they find that channel, Missy?
It's called Missy in Japan. If you type it in on YouTube, I think that's 3 separate. I don't know if it's lowercase or not, but yeah, it's just Missy in Japan.
And Monica just put that in the chat box. So, and Missy has one great video about her experience as a student with ADHD. I think it's something great if you are advising a student, or if you are that student, go take a look at it, pass it on. I thought it was a really helpful one for me, especially as I was doing my research. I hope it's helpful for everyone else. I think it would be. And but it's not only about that too. Most of her video, pretty much every other video there, is just all about her experiences in Japan, and I know you've had a lot. And I'm trying to think other resources. Does anybody have any questions before we close out? Great. Well, I wonder if I can invite our panelists. We've sort of probably covered this from various different angles, but any last comment about your most satisfying experiences in Japan, or just kind of final takeaways?
Yeah, I think being able to come abroad taught me a lot about seeing things from other perspectives. And as a child, I really chatted a lot and I would never stop talking. So being in an environment where I couldn't speak taught me a lot about myself, because I had to do much more observation and I was able to put myself in the shoes of other people. So even if it's not Japan, I think studying abroad or working abroad is an incredible experience. I think everyone would benefit from doing it.
Absolutely. And I would say, in addition to the personal developmental aspects, it's just great to think about your own home from being abroad. So I think students who go to Japan or elsewhere come back and look at the United States or whatever their home country is slightly and perhaps even profoundly differently. So you learn about yourself and the world as well as the country that you're visiting.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Yeah, I mean, for us, definitely this is why we value international exchange so much, because of the intangible benefits that it brings to people with disabilities and without disabilities. And with that, we do have about 8 minutes left on the webinar, but if nobody has any more questions, I can go ahead and bring it to a close. Thank you so much, Monica, for helping with the technical details and the recording and everything, ACS for the captions, Missy and Alistair for your excellent work presenting, and all of the audience that have been able to join us. We appreciate you being here, and also the many questions that you all came up with as you registered for the webinar. You should expect to see a survey go out either today or tomorrow, kind of requesting that you share a few thoughts with us about your experience on the webinar, how we could do things better. We'll also be sending out in the next day, or perhaps in the next week, a link to the press release on our website, which will be updated to include a copy of the transcript of the webinar, as well as a copy of the recording. And with that, also just kind of some notes about the Clearinghouse. We do have some interesting, exciting publications coming down the line. We have the next edition of our A World Awaits You Away journal, and it's going to be focused on community colleges and opportunities to study abroad for community college students. And I think sometimes, you know, community college students, we don't think about them enough as candidates for study abroad, and yet many of them do. In fact, I believe, Missy, you went to a community college before, and look at you now. So yeah, I hope that you all will check out that magazine publication. It's going to come out in September. If any of you are in Boston in September 12th to the 15th, I'm going to be at Abilities Expo, so it'd be a great time to meet up. And also, I hope that you all will be following our newsletter and making some space available on your calendars in the summer of 2020, because we have an excellent symposium coming up. It's going to be Joining Hands Symposium 2.0. Don't take that as the verbatim name. If Monica wants to come in, she can share some details too. But we did our first Joining Hands Symposium in 2018. It was an amazing opportunity for exchange and disability service professionals, and also people with disabilities like myself and Missy, to come together and share our ideas and experiences for how we could improve access to international exchange of all kinds for people with all kinds of different disabilities and from all kinds of different social backgrounds. It's the chance that you get that you don't really get at other conferences to access more specialized content focused on including people with different disabilities in study and volunteer abroad programs. It's getting beyond just Disability 101. And it's also an opportunity for you, when you have developed an innovative practice, to share with an audience that are also interested in the same subject. So we had so much fun doing Joining Hands 1.0 2018. Well, you know, we are ready to take it on again, the next edition in the year 2020. So we'll be sending out requests for proposals in a few months to present, and also there's also going to be an opportunity to register next year and to join us. And so to follow our newsletter, please, so that you can get the latest on that and be kept up to date. And with that, I believe that will clear it out. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We wish you all a happy Thursday and a happy weekend. Signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carmisha.